You are no son of mine. Get out through the back door before you drag your pathetic life through your brother's perfect night." My father's words rang in my ears, louder than the torrential rain hitting the rusted green dumpsters in the alleyway. I stood there, the icy downpour soaking rapidly through the shoulders of my charcoal blazer, staring blankly at the heavy metal service door that had just been slammed shut in my face. The sheer force of the slam echoed in the narrow brick corridor, a final, definitive punctuation mark on 32 years of being the family's unwanted burden. Just 15 minutes ago, I had walked through the towering glass front entrance of the most exclusive, high-end resort in the city to celebrate my older brother's engagement. Instead of a welcome, a smile, or even a basic acknowledgement of my existence, I received a public execution of my character. My own parents disowned me in front of hundreds of high society guests, simply because my lack of a flashy designer suit embarrassed their carefully constructed, hollow image. They shoved me out into the cold, treating me like bags of actual garbage meant for the disposal bins beside me. But as I stood there in the freezing rain, my teeth chattering and the water dripping down the bridge of my nose, a slow, cold smile crept onto my face. They thought they had just thrown out a penniless loser. They had no idea I held the master key to this $50 million empire, and their perfect, glittering night was about to become a living nightmare. I wiped the cold, stinging rain from my face with the back of my hand and took a deep, shuddering breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs and steady my dangerously racing heart. The memory of what had just transpired in the grand lobby was still burning white-hot in my mind. I had driven across town in the quiet of the evening, feeling a strange mix of dread and familial obligation. I had arrived a little early, dressed in a clean, tailored charcoal blazer, a crisp white button-down shirt, and dark slacks. It was an outfit that was understated, respectful, and professional. It was not cheap, but it lacked the giant, ostentatious logos that my family worshipped. In my family's twisted reality, if a luxury brand name was not screaming from your lapel or your belt buckle, you were absolutely nothing. The moment I stepped onto the pristine, imported Italian marble floor of the grand lobby, my mother, Maeve, spotted me from across the room. She was wearing a violently expensive-looking emerald gown. Her eyes widened in absolute horror, her jaw dropping slightly as if a diseased stray dog had just wandered into her immaculate living room and tracked mud onto a white rug. She let out a sharp, dramatic, breathless gasp, followed by a shrill screech that was loud enough to completely silence the elegant string quartet playing softly in the corner of the lobby. Before I could even raise my hand to offer a polite greeting or explain that I was just there to quietly support Soren, my father, Gideon, marched aggressively across the expansive lobby. His face was flushed a deep, mottled red, a combination of pure anger and the expensive scotch he had undoubtedly been consuming since the early afternoon. He did not offer a hug. He did not extend a hand for a shake. He did not even say hello. He lunged forward, grabbed the lapels of my coat with both of his heavy hands, and yanked me violently toward the shadows of the cloakroom, desperate to get me out of sight from Kaya's incredibly wealthy, dignified family. His grip was bruising, his knuckles digging into my collarbone. He hissed at me, his breath smelling heavily of alcohol and expensive cigars, spitting words that were precisely calculated to tear me down to the studs. He told me I was a permanent stain on the family legacy. He aggressively bragged about how many tens of thousands of dollars they were spending on this venue, loudly proclaiming that worthless people like me did not belong in a place of such class, luxury, and prestige. He called me a failure, a jealous, bitter shadow trying to ruin Soren's shining, monumental moment. A few early arriving guests stood there, crystal champagne flutes frozen in their hands, watching in stunned silence as a father verbally shredded his own son in the middle of a luxury hotel. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I did not fight back physically. I just looked deep into his bloodshot eyes and saw decades of toxic favoritism hardening into pure, unadulterated hatred. They pushed and shoved me toward the unmarked service doors meant only for the maintenance staff and kitchen crew. But what my parents and my perfectly groomed golden brother did not know, what they could not possibly fathom in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, was that the black magnetic keycard resting quietly in my inner breast pocket could unlock every single door in this $50 million building. I pushed the heavy steel service door open with my shoulder, stepping out of the freezing downpour and trading the harsh weather for the warm, humid, food-scented air of the staff corridors. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the bass from the live band in the grand ballroom upstairs reverberated deeply through the thick concrete walls, a constant reminder of the extravagant party I was currently banned from. I walked slowly down the narrow, brightly lit hallway, my wet shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum. This was a path entirely invisible to the wealthy guests above, a hidden world of utility and labor. This was the absolute spine of the resort, the gritty place where the real, unglamorous work happened. Moving silently through the shadows of the service carts and laundry bins, my mind instinctively began to build a dark museum of pain, vividly displaying all the pivotal, agonizing moments that had inevitably led to this exact night. I was not just the black sheep of this family. I was the designated scapegoat, the emotional dumping ground for all of their insecurities, failures, and mistakes. The very first exhibit in my mental museum was a cheap, shiny plastic trophy with a peeling gold sticker. I was exactly 17 years old. I had spent 6 grueling months, sacrificing my sleep, my weekends, and my social life, coding a complex software application that ended up winning the highly competitive state programming championship. I remembered standing on that massive, blindingly lit auditorium stage for 2 solid hours, my eyes frantically scanning the sea of parents in the crowd, desperately searching for my mother or father. They never showed up. When I finally took the bus home, clutching that cheap plastic trophy to my chest like it was made of solid gold, I found our driveway completely empty. They had driven 3 states over that very morning to co-sign an astronomical loan for a brand new luxury sports car for Soren, simply because he had thrown a massive temper tantrum about the indignity of driving a used sedan to his freshman year of college. My monumental victory, the first real achievement of my life, was met with a hastily scribbled note on the refrigerator telling me to heat up some leftover meatloaf. The second exhibit was a shattered, violently splintered wooden fence. Just a year later, Soren, drunk on his own inflated ego and far too many cheap beers at a local party, crashed that exact same luxury sports car straight through our wealthy neighbor's expensive, custom-built landscaping and into their retaining wall. He was facing a massive, life-ruining civil lawsuit and a permanently ruined criminal record before he even officially started his university classes. Gideon did not hire a lawyer to teach his golden boy a much-needed lesson about responsibility. Instead, he dragged me forcefully into the kitchen in the middle of the night, slammed his heavy fist onto the wooden table so hard the coffee mugs rattled, and aggressively forced me to take the blame. I was the younger brother. I had a completely clean record. I was a minor. He looked me dead in the eye and told me it was my absolute duty, my obligation, to protect the sacred family name and ensure Soren's bright future was not compromised. I spent the next 2 excruciating years working brutal, back-breaking night shifts at a dusty logistics warehouse, giving up every dime of my meager paycheck to pay off a massive debt I never incurred, all while Soren gleefully posted perfectly curated pictures of his lavish fraternity parties online. The final, most heartbreaking exhibit in this mental gallery was a simple, single-page bank statement. It was the ultimate betrayal. When I was 19, after years of grueling warehouse work and saving every penny I could find, I had finally managed to scrape together just enough money to pay for my first year of college tuition. I had the official acceptance letter sitting proudly on my cramped desk. The day before the final tuition payment was due, I logged into my online banking portal to initiate the transfer. The balance staring back at me was exactly 0. Maeve had used her outdated access as a joint account holder, a technicality left over from when I was a minor, to completely drain every single cent I had earned. When I confronted her, tears of rage in my eyes, she casually informed me that she had poured my entire future, my hard-earned savings, into a terrible, half-baked startup business idea Soren had pitched to her over breakfast. She claimed, with a straight face, that she was making a smart investment in the family's true breadwinner. That startup completely folded in less than 3 months. I never went to that college. Uncle Thorne, my father's estranged younger brother and arguably the only decent, honest man in our entire bloodline, had to quietly lend me exactly $500 just so I could fix my broken, second-hand laptop and start freelancing from my bedroom. I built my massive, multi-million-dollar fortune entirely from that borrowed $500. I had spent my entire life silently swallowing their toxic poison, absorbing their abuse to keep the peace. But tonight, standing in the underbelly of my own resort, seeing them build a glamorous stage out of lies and stolen money, I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. I was done being the victim. It was finally time for me to pull the heavy velvet curtains down on their pathetic show. I walked slowly past the industrial laundry room, the smell of bleach and fresh linen filling my nose, and grabbed a clean, perfectly pressed black serving apron from a metal rolling rack. I tied the strings tightly around my waist, flattening the fabric against my slacks. It was the absolute perfect camouflage. In a venue this massive, this opulent, the service staff were practically invisible to the wealthy, self-absorbed guests. We were just moving parts of the scenery, expected to provide seamless service without ever being seen or heard. I took the humming service elevator up to the ballroom level and slipped quietly through the heavy, padded swinging doors into the massive, glittering event space. The room was truly breathtaking. For massive crystal chandeliers, each imported from Europe, cast a warm, golden, flattering glow over the towering, meticulously arranged floral centerpieces and the sweeping silk drapery that adorned the walls. I had actually approved the design of this specific room myself a year ago, choosing every single tiny detail to exude an aura of quiet, refined luxury. But tonight, the people standing right in the middle of it were actively cheapening the very air they breathed. I stayed carefully hidden in the dim shadows near the bustling catering station, grabbing a white linen cloth and pretending to meticulously polish a silver tray of empty champagne flutes. From my strategic vantage point, the stark contrast between the two families was painfully, hilariously obvious. Kaya's family, the bride's side, stood near the center of the room, speaking in quiet, measured tones. They were genuine old money. They were completely secure in who they were and their place in the world, requiring absolutely no external validation from the room or the people in it. On the exact opposite side, my family was performing a grotesque circus act. Maeve was wearing a heavily sequined dress that caught the light like a cheap disco ball, laughing far too loudly at jokes that were not funny, and aggressively touching the arms of important-looking people she had just met 5 minutes ago. Gideon was aggressively pumping the hands of Kaya's father and uncles, leaning in uncomfortably close, projecting the frantic, desperate energy of a man trying to aggressively sell a terrible used car before the engine completely died. And then there was Soren. My supposedly brilliant brother stood right by the intricately carved swan ice sculpture, wearing a flashy velvet tuxedo that I knew for an absolute fact was bought on a high-interest credit card. He was holding court with a group of young executives, loudly telling wildly exaggerated stories of his supposed business conquests and massive profits. Suddenly, Aunt Daphne, my mother's younger sister and the family's chief flying monkey, strutted past the catering station. She was carrying a small porcelain plate of expensive appetizers like they were stolen crown jewels, her nose turned up at the ceiling. She was a woman who fed on drama and misery. She intentionally bumped her shoulder hard into mine, pretending it was an accident, and sent a massive splash of cheap red wine right onto my leather shoes. She stopped, turned to glare at me, her eyes narrowing as she recognized my face hiding under the dim lighting of the service area. A nasty, triumphant smirk spread across her heavily made-up face. She leaned in close, her overwhelming perfume smelling like wilted roses and pure malice, and whispered right into my ear, telling me that garbage should always stay exactly where the garbage belongs. She turned on her heel and practically sprinted away, incredibly eager to report my pathetic, humiliated state to Maeve. I did not flinch. I did not wipe the wine off my shoe, because while I was standing there, absorbing her venom, a massive, game-changing piece of the puzzle suddenly fell perfectly into place. I overheard Gideon bragging loudly to a very confused-looking guest about Soren's logistics company securing a massive, exclusive government contract. He named a highly specific $5 million urban development fund. My fund, the fund I personally managed. Soren's failing, horribly mismanaged logistics company had recently submitted a desperate, blind bid for a bailout contract from my investment firm. They were using this lavish, insanely expensive engagement party, hosted at my premium venue, to forcefully create a fake facade of massive financial stability in order to fool Kaya's wealthy family into trusting them, and to simultaneously trick the strict auditors at my firm into approving the grant. Soren confidently raised his crystal glass for a toast, loudly calling himself a self-made titan of industry to the clapping crowd. He flashed that practiced, incredibly arrogant smile, having absolutely no idea that my phone, hidden deep in my pocket, had just vibrated with a very urgent text message from my general manager. I slipped quickly back through the heavy swinging doors and straight into the massive, brightly lit industrial kitchen. The sudden temperature change hit me instantly, the heat from the massive commercial stoves washing over me, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the intense, burning heat of the sheer chaos currently unfolding among the kitchen staff. Stainless steel pots were clanging aggressively, servers were rushing around like ants, and the highly decorated head chef was standing frozen near the expediting station, his face a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated frustration. He was gripping a piece of printed paper tightly in his fist, waving it frantically at the pale-looking floor manager. I stepped closer, keeping my head down and blending in with the prep cooks, and listened closely. The check had bounced. The massive $100,000 cashier's check that was supposed to serve as the deposit for the ballroom rental, the luxury catering, and the premium open bar had just been returned by the bank for completely insufficient funds. Before the terrified floor manager could even formulate a response to the furious chef, the kitchen doors burst open once again. Soren rushed in. His perfectly practiced, arrogant smile was completely gone, rapidly replaced by a pale, frantic, genuinely terrified expression. Sweat was beading on his forehead. He was so panicked he did not even notice me standing just 10 feet away near the vegetable prep tables. He paced nervously near the massive stainless steel doors of the walk-in freezer, pulling out his cell phone with hands that were visibly trembling. I stepped quietly behind a tall metal rack of hanging copper pots, hiding myself completely, and listened intently to his conversation. He barked aggressively into the phone, his voice laced with pure panic and desperation. He ruthlessly ordered whoever was on the other end of the line, presumably his terrified accountant, to immediately drain the entire employee pension fund of his logistics company and wire every single cent directly to his personal checking account right this second. He argued frantically that he desperately needed to survive the night, that the terrible optics of failing financially in front of Kaya's incredibly wealthy family would ruin his entire grand plan. He was consciously, willingly choosing to completely destroy the financial futures and the lives of 50 hardworking, innocent employees just to keep up his pathetic, fake appearances for a few more hours. But apparently, illegally stealing from his own loyal employees was not the end of his desperate, chaotic spiral. Soren abruptly ended the phone call, shoved the phone into his pocket, and aggressively flagged down Silas, the head audio and visual technician for the event, who was walking past with a bundle of cables. Silas looked deeply confused as Soren forcefully pulled him into a dark, secluded corner near the dishwashing station. I watched in absolute horror as my brother reached deep into his velvet jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded wad of $100 bills. He shoved the cash aggressively into Silas's hands, speaking in rapid, hushed, demanding tones. I strained my ears over the loud humming of the industrial refrigerators and caught just enough of the conversation to make my blood run completely cold. Soren was actively paying Silas a massive bribe to intentionally sabotage the wireless microphone system right at the exact moment Kaya's father was scheduled to give his highly anticipated, emotional blessing speech. The vicious plan was sickeningly simple and deeply cruel. He wanted Silas to cause a massive, embarrassing technical failure, completely humiliate the bride's father in front of hundreds of people, and then use that manufactured disaster as leverage to angrily refuse payment to the venue, blaming the resort for ruining the most important night of his life. He was perfectly willing to destroy a priceless, beautiful memory for his own fiancée just to escape a massive bill he could not afford to pay. My simmering anger completely stopped burning in that moment. It instantly froze into a sharp, terrifying, deeply calculated logic. It was officially time for the real owner of this resort to clock in and end this charade. I slowly took off the wine-stained black serving apron, folded it with meticulous, terrifying precision, and set it down neatly on the cold surface of a stainless steel prep counter. I walked out of the chaotic kitchen, completely ignoring the frantic energy and the yelling of the staff around me. I bypassed the busy main elevators in the lobby and headed straight down a quiet, carpeted side corridor toward a discreet, completely unmarked wooden panel hidden flush against the decorative wall. I pressed my right thumb firmly against the hidden biometric scanner. The concealed door slid open smoothly and silently, revealing the private VIP elevator that only 3 people in the entire world had the security clearance to access. I stepped inside the plush, mirrored cab, firmly pressing the single glowing button for the absolute top floor, the executive suite. When the polished steel doors silently parted a minute later, the deep, heavy silence of the top floor wrapped around me like a perfectly tailored, very expensive suit. The air up here did not smell of food or cheap perfume. It smelled of expensive leather polish, fresh orchids, and quiet, absolute authority. Standing rigidly in the center of the massive, glass-walled office was Alaric, my general manager. He was a tall, imposing man who had been my right hand since the beginning. He was holding a glowing digital tablet, looking deadly serious. He looked up as I entered, giving me a sharp, respectful nod. "Good evening, boss," he said, his deep voice completely steady. "How exactly do you want to handle them?" I walked slowly over to the massive, custom-built mahogany desk at the end of the room and sat down heavily in the high-backed leather executive chair. "Bring up the master control system," I ordered, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying across the quiet room. Alaric quickly tapped the screen of his tablet, and the massive, wall-to-wall digital monitor system in front of the desk flared to life instantly. Dozens of high-definition camera angles from the ballroom, the kitchen, the lobby, and the service hallways illuminated the dark executive office. We had absolutely everything on tape. I firmly instructed Alaric not to go downstairs and confront them about the bounce check just yet. I wanted them to remain comfortable. I wanted them to truly believe they were getting away with their grand deception. Then, I pulled out my secure, encrypted laptop from the desk drawer and logged directly into the main server of my private investment firm. I navigated swiftly through the complex menus to the specific portfolio of distressed financial assets we had recently acquired from a failing bank. Right there, flashing ominously on the screen in bright red numbers, was the massive, toxic corporate debt of Soren's logistics company. I quickly analyzed the files. The shocking truth was staring me right in the face. Soren had systematically embezzled exactly $2.5 million from his own company, pushing Gideon and Maeve, who technically held small minority shares, into massive legal jeopardy and potential prison time, all without their knowledge. I picked up my phone and dialed Uncle Thorne. He answered on the first ring. I quickly explained the situation. Thorne sighed heavily into the phone, his voice laced with sadness but complete resolve. He confirmed that Gideon had just secretly mortgaged his and Maeve's fully paid-off house to a predatory lender just to fund this ridiculous, flashy engagement party. "Do what you have to do, Torin," Thorne said quietly. "This family desperately needs a major surgery to finally cut out this massive tumor." With a few rapid, decisive keystrokes on my laptop, I officially initiated a total, irreversible freeze on every single corporate bank account tied to Soren's company and immediately triggered an automatic fraud audit protocol with the federal banking authorities. I locked the heavy steel trap shut. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepled my fingers together, and let out a long, slow breath into the quiet room. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, looking straight down at the glittering ballroom far below. My mother was happily showing off her cheap jewelry. My father was laughing loudly with his stolen confidence, and my brother was smirking like a king. "Enjoy the applause," I whispered to the empty room, "because in exactly 10 minutes your entire world is going to completely cease to exist." The heavy silence of the executive suite felt like a physical weight settling over my shoulders, a stark contrast to the fabricated joy echoing in the ballroom far below. I remained seated in my leather chair, my eyes locked on the digital monitor wall, that displayed the stolen lives and the fragile lies of my own family. The trap was officially set. The corporate accounts were frozen tight, and the federal audit protocol was already churning through the banking networks, flagging every single fraudulent transaction Soren had made over the past 3 years. But freezing a bank account was a silent victory. It was invisible. The people in that ballroom, especially my parents and my brother, dealt exclusively in optics. They worshipped appearances. To truly make them understand the gravity of their actions, to finally break the cycle of abuse and delusion, the truth had to be dragged out into the blinding light for everyone to see. I reached across the expansive mahogany desk and pulled a sleek, heavily encrypted titanium flash drive from a hidden drawer. I plugged it into my laptop. With slow, deliberate keystrokes, I began compiling the ultimate weapon of truth. First, I downloaded the crystal-clear security footage of Soren cornering Silas near the dishwashing station. The high-definition camera captured every single detail, from the desperate sweat glistening on Soren's forehead to the thick wad of $100 bills changing hands. The audio was slightly muffled by the humming refrigerators, but the malicious intent to sabotage Kaya's father was undeniably clear. Next, I exported the horrifying financial spreadsheets detailing the $2.5 million in embezzled corporate funds. I made sure to highlight the specific routing numbers that led directly to Soren's hidden offshore accounts. Then, I pulled the public property records that Uncle Thorne had just confirmed over the phone. I downloaded a digital copy of the predatory mortgage contract Gideon had secretly signed, effectively signing away the house he and Maeve had lived in for 3 decades, all to fund a singular night of cheap champagne and fake prestige. Finally, I saved the most devastating piece of evidence: the official rejection letter from my investment firm, firmly denying Soren's desperate bid for the $5 million bailout grant, bearing my own unforgeable digital signature at the bottom. I safely ejected the titanium drive and held it tightly in my palm. The metal felt cold and heavy, a tiny object containing the raw power to obliterate an entire family's fake legacy. I looked up at Alaric, who was standing quietly near the door, his posture rigid and his eyes filled with a quiet, fierce loyalty. Alaric knew my history. He had been there in the early days when I was sleeping on a worn-out couch in a tiny office, living on instant noodles and cheap coffee, desperately trying to build this empire from scratch while my family ignored my existence. He knew exactly what this night meant to me. "It is time, Alaric," I said, my voice steady and surprisingly calm. "Go down to the ballroom. Stop the music. Take the stage and make the announcement about the bounce deposit check. Do not mention the fraud. Do not mention me. Just tell them the venue requires immediate payment or the event is permanently canceled. Let them panic. Let Gideon yell and try to throw his non-existent weight around. Wait for my signal before you do anything else." Alaric nodded solemnly, a faint, anticipating smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Consider it done, boss," he replied, turning swiftly and exiting the suite. I watched him leave, then walked over to the private executive wardrobe tucked into the corner of the room. I stripped off the rain-dampened charcoal blazer I had worn when my father shoved me into the alleyway. I replaced it with a flawless, custom-tailored midnight blue suit jacket that I kept in the office for emergencies. I adjusted my cuffs, straightened my collar, and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The man looking back at me was no longer the frightened, helpless teenager who had been forced to take the blame for a car crash. He was no longer the naive young man whose college fund had been stolen. I was Torin. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was the sole owner of the ground they were currently dancing on. I slipped the titanium drive into my inner pocket, took one last deep breath of the quiet air, and walked out of the suite. I bypassed the hidden VIP elevator this time. I walked toward the grand, sweeping glass staircase that descended directly into the main lobby. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time to walk through the front door. The descent down the grand glass staircase felt like walking through a dream. With every step I took, the muffled, thumping bass of the live band playing in the ballroom grew slightly louder, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I could see the glittering chandeliers through the massive frosted glass doors of the event space. My heart was beating in a slow, powerful rhythm. I was entirely focused, my mind clear and sharp. As I reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped onto the imported Italian marble of the main lobby, I saw two of my senior security guards standing near the ballroom entrance. They immediately stood up straighter, their hands instinctively moving to their lapels, ready to greet me. I raised a single finger to my lips, signaling them to remain silent and hold their positions. I stopped just outside the heavy wooden doors, waiting in the shadows, and listened closely to the sounds bleeding out from the party. Inside the ballroom, the lively jazz music suddenly screeched to a halt. The abrupt silence was jarring, instantly replacing the festive atmosphere with a thick, uncomfortable tension. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the massive crowd of guests. Through the crack in the doors, I heard Alaric's deep, commanding voice echoing over the main microphone system. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alaric announced, his tone professional but undeniably firm. "I deeply apologize for this sudden interruption to your evening. However, the management of this resort has just been informed by our banking institution that the initial deposit check provided for this event has been officially returned for insufficient funds. Unless a valid form of payment for the sum of $100,000 is presented to our accounting department within the next 5 minutes, we will be forced to shut down all services and ask everyone to vacate the premises immediately." The collective gasp from the crowd was loud enough to hear clearly in the lobby. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and incredibly fragile. And then, right on cue, the fragile silence shattered. Gideon's voice boomed across the room, thick with outrage and the aggressive confidence of a man entirely disconnected from reality. "What is the meaning of this?" Gideon roared, his footsteps stomping heavily against the wooden dance floor. "How dare you interrupt my son's engagement with this ridiculous incompetence? Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who we are? We are spending a fortune at this establishment. Call your general manager right now. Call the owner. I demand to speak to the person in charge of this venue, so I can have you fired on the spot." I closed my eyes for a brief second, savoring the sheer, delicious irony of his words. He was demanding to see the owner. He was begging for the very person he had thrown into the trash just 2 hours prior. I opened my eyes, gave a sharp nod to the security guards, and pushed the heavy wooden doors open with both hands. The doors swung wide, hitting the stoppers with a loud, authoritative thud that drew every single eye in the room directly to the entrance. I stepped into the blinding light of the crystal chandeliers. The room was frozen. 300 wealthy guests, dressed in their finest attire, stared at me in profound confusion. I walked slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle of the ballroom, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silent room. My mother, Maeve, was the first to recognize me. The color instantly drained from her heavily made-up face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She raised a shaking hand to her mouth, letting out a strangled, pathetic gasp. Gideon, standing aggressively near the stage with his chest puffed out, slowly turned his head. His bloodshot eyes went wide, his jaw dropping as he took in the sight of me wearing an immaculate suit, walking with the posture of a king rather than a banished peasant. Soren, standing near the frozen ice sculpture, looked like he had just seen a ghost. The arrogant smirk he always wore had entirely vanished. I did not stop walking until I reached the very center of the dance floor, standing directly between my family and Kaya's deeply confused parents. The head of security walked briskly behind me, stopping 2 paces back and bowing his head slightly in a clear show of respect. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. "You wanted to speak to the owner, father?" I asked, my voice calm, smooth, and carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I am right here. What exactly seems to be the problem?" The sheer, undeniable shock that swept through the ballroom was a physical force. It hit my family like a freight train. Gideon took a stumbling step backward, his legs suddenly seemingly unable to support his weight. He bumped hard into a cocktail table, sending a tray of crystal glasses crashing to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Maeve let out a pathetic, whimpering sound, clutching the fabric of her expensive dress as if it could somehow protect her from the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Soren simply stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, entirely incapable of forming a single coherent word. Kaya, the beautiful, innocent bride-to-be, stepped forward, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Soren, what is going on?" Kaya asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why is your brother saying he owns this place? I thought you said he was unemployed and troubled." Soren desperately tried to recover, his survival instincts kicking in. He pointed a shaking, accusing finger at me, his face turning a blotchy red. "Do not listen to him, Kaya," Soren yelled, his voice cracking horribly. "He is lying. He is a fraud, a hacker. He broke in here to ruin my night because he is jealous of my success. Security, remove this trespasser immediately." He looked frantically at the security guards standing behind me, fully expecting them to tackle me to the ground. Instead, the head of security simply crossed his arms, staring at Soren with cold, unapologetic disdain. I slowly pulled the titanium flash drive from my inner pocket and held it up for the entire room to see. "Jealous of your success, Soren?" I asked, my voice dripping with icy sarcasm. "Let us take a very close look at exactly how successful you truly are." I handed the drive to Alaric, who immediately plugged it into the main media console at the edge of the stage. The massive wall-to-wall digital screens that had previously been displaying elegant, looping videos of flower petals suddenly flickered and went entirely black. The room held its collective breath. A second later, the screens flared back to life. The first image was the high-definition security footage from the kitchen corridor. The video played in crystal-clear quality, the audio piped directly through the state-of-the-art sound system. The entire room watched in horrified silence as Soren, sweating and frantic, pulled a thick wad of cash from his pocket and shoved it into Silas's hands. The audio was undeniable. "Make the microphone fail when the old man talks," Soren's voice echoed through the ballroom, sounding cruel and desperate. "I need an excuse to refuse the bill. Just do it." Kaya let out a sharp, devastated cry, covering her mouth with both hands. Her father, the man Soren had planned to brutally humiliate, turned a deep shade of purple, his fists clenching at his sides. But I was not finished. The video faded out, instantly replaced by the glaring red financial spreadsheets of Soren's logistics company. I grabbed a spare microphone from the stand and addressed the silent, captivated crowd. "What you are looking at is the reality of my brother's alleged empire," I explained, my voice steady and unyielding. "Soren has systematically embezzled $2.5 million from his own company over the past 3 years. The business is entirely bankrupt, surviving solely on stolen employee pension funds and unpaid vendor invoices." The screens shifted again, displaying the official mortgage documents. A collective gasp echoed from Kaya's family. "And this," I continued, pointing to the screen, "is the predatory mortgage my father, Gideon, secretly took out on his fully paid-off home just a few weeks ago. He risked his entire livelihood, his entire future, just to fund this pathetic illusion of wealth for a single evening." Gideon buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, defeated sob. Maeve stared at the screen, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror as she finally realized she was entirely homeless. Soren, desperate, cornered like a rat, screamed over the microphone. "It is fake. He fabricated those documents. We are securing a massive $5 million grant tomorrow. It will cover everything." I smiled gently, a cold, empty smile that held zero warmth. I gave Alaric one final nod. The screen flashed to the last piece of evidence. It was the official, heavily watermarked rejection letter from my private investment firm, declining the bailout grant for Soren's company. I read the final lines aloud to the silent room. "Due to severe financial mismanagement and suspected fraudulent activity, this firm unconditionally denies the request for funding." The letter was signed by the chief executive officer. Me. The silence that followed was profound. The truth had finally ripped through the fabric of their lies, leaving absolutely nothing but devastation in its wake. The power dynamics in the massive ballroom shifted so violently and so rapidly it felt like the gravity in the room had been permanently altered. The polished, unassailable image my family had spent decades meticulously crafting and violently protecting had been entirely reduced to ashes in less than 5 minutes. Kaya, her face stained with tears of deep betrayal and profound embarrassment, slowly reached down and pulled the massive, expensive engagement ring off her trembling finger. She did not yell. She did not scream. She simply walked over to where Soren stood, paralyzed by the sheer weight of his own exposure, and threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his chest. It bounced off his velvet tuxedo and clattered loudly onto the wooden floor. "You sicken me," Kaya whispered, her voice carrying a venom so pure it made Soren flinch. "You are a thief, a liar, and a coward. I never want to see your face again." Kaya turned gracefully, linked arms with her furious father, and began walking toward the exit. Her entire extended family followed silently behind her, moving as a unified front, their expressions radiating pure, unadulterated disgust. As they left, the remaining guests began to rapidly murmur among themselves, eagerly gathering their coats and purses, desperate to escape the toxic fallout of the ruined evening. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Aunt Daphne, the woman who had intentionally spilled wine on my shoes just an hour ago, slinking toward the service exit like a terrified rat fleeing a sinking ship, her head ducked low to avoid making any eye contact. As the ballroom rapidly emptied, Gideon and Maeve finally seemed to grasp the full, horrifying reality of their situation. Their golden boy was a criminal. Their fortune was entirely gone. Their home was legally forfeited to a predatory lender. And the son they had physically thrown into the garbage was the only person with the power to save them. Maeve broke first. She rushed across the floor, tears streaming down her ruined makeup, and fell to her knees right in front of me. She reached out, trying to grab the fabric of my trousers. "Torin, please," Maeve begged, her voice a desperate, hysterical whine. "Please, you have to help us. We are your family. We are your blood. We did not know he stole the money. We are going to lose the house. Please, son, you have so much, you can fix this." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, ensuring her grasping hands found nothing but empty air. I looked down at the woman who had stolen my college tuition, feeling no anger, no sadness, just a profound, echoing emptiness. "You disowned me 2 hours ago," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the massive, nearly empty room. "You stood in that lobby and explicitly told me I was no son of yours." Thorough, unforgiving investigation into Soren's logistics company, the trail of embezzled funds, fake invoices, and stolen pension money was so extensive it took months to unravel. Soren was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of severe corporate fraud and grand larceny. He was currently serving a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary upstate, his designer suits permanently replaced by a standard-issue orange uniform, his arrogant smirk erased by the harsh, daily reality of prison life. As for Gideon and Maeve, their catastrophic fall from grace was absolute and unforgiving. Without Soren's stolen money to prop them up, and with the bank swiftly foreclosing on their deeply mortgaged home, they were entirely wiped out. They had been forced to file for personal bankruptcy, losing every single luxury asset they had spent their lives bragging about. According to Thorne, who occasionally kept tabs on them from a safe distance, they were currently living in a cramped, badly maintained one-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. To pay their basic utility bills, the two people who had spent their entire lives mocking the working class were now working grueling manual labor jobs. Gideon was working night shifts as a security guard at a dusty warehouse, ironically similar to the one he had forced me to work in as a teenager. Maeve was working part-time scanning groceries at a discount supermarket. They were finally experiencing the harsh, unforgiving reality of the world they had always looked down upon. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I did not feel a sense of vindictive joy at their suffering, but rather a profound, quiet sense of closure. I had spent so many years desperately trying to earn the love and respect of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. I had let their toxic favoritism and their shallow, materialistic values define my self-worth. But the moment they threw me out into that alleyway, the moment they officially severed those painful ties, they inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of my life. Complete, unrestricted freedom. True respect, I realized, does not come from wearing borrowed velvet tuxedos or bragging about money you do not actually own. It comes from the quiet, relentless effort of building something genuine with your own two hands. It comes from integrity, resilience, and the courage to finally walk away from the people who only exist to pull you down into their own misery. Sometimes, being fiercely rejected by the people you desperately thought you needed is the exact catalyst required to build a kingdom of your own, free from the heavy, suffocating chains of their toxic expectations. I looked out over the thriving courtyard, watching my dedicated staff move with purpose and pride, and for the first time in my entire life, I truly felt like I was exactly where I belonged. What do you guys think? If you were in my shoes, standing in that ballroom with all the power in your hands, would you have quietly paid off their catering bill to help them save face in front of the guests before kicking them out? Or was the public, brutal exposure exactly what they deserved for a lifetime of abuse? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on the next chapter of crazy, unbelievable drama.